Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a video on the second part of the series for the argument from C.S. Lewis on anthropological moral objectivism as the only legitimate argument for moral objectivism. If you haven't already, go watch the first video as that covers proposition number 1. And in this part of the series, we will cover propositions number 2 and 3. Proposition number 2 is that moral value is universally held to be objective by humans. And proposition number 3 is that we learn moral values and value measurement skills by practice, or in other words, by developing our conscience. Lewis explains in his books the claim that civilizations throughout different ages have had quite different moralities is simply not true. Of course, Lewis admits that there have been differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a complete difference, such as inventing a completely new and different morality. If anyone were to compare the moral teachings of the ancient Egyptians, the Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, Romans, and Celts, what will really strike that investigator will be how similar they are to each other and to the investigator's own time period. The word Lewis chose in the book, The Abolition of Man, to represent the objective anthropological moral law is the Tao. Generally, Tao is translated as the way. For example, the way you can talk about is not the way you can walk on, is a quote from the Tao Te Ching, book representing the canon of Taoism. So for those people who have never heard of Taoism or the Tao Te Ching, I am going to read chapter 25 from the Tao to give people a feeling of what that might entail, besides what Lewis actively explains it as in terms of the framework of objective reasoning principles, because it's definitely a perfect term, in my opinion. So, chapter 25. There was something formless and perfect before the universe was born. It is serene, empty, solitary, unchanging, infinite, eternally present. It is the mother of the universe. For lack of a better name, I call it the Tao. It flows through all things, inside and outside, and returns to the origin of all things. The Tao is great. The universe is great. Earth is great. Man is great. These are the four great powers. Man follows Earth. Earth follows the universe. The universe follows the Tao. The Tao follows only itself. Lewis and I are not using this term to tell people to be Taoists. It is simply a title to remind people that all societies and cultures throughout history have recognized that moral value is objective. For anyone to claim that moral value is subjective is to separate oneself from these developments that have taken place to progress ourselves. Lewis and I readily admit that by lumping together all of these moralities, there will definitely be some contradictions and even some absurdities. The point is not that all traditions of morality coincide on every point. This second proposition is that they all agree on the objectivity of moral value. Those who attempt to step outside the Tao attempt to step outside the human community by definition because it's only within the framework of objective reasoning principles that people make moral choices. Outside that framework, the only fundamental basis is irrationality. Usually, this irrationality stems from a desire to satisfy the individual or collective's pleasure addiction of more and better sense stimulus. This always descends into might makes right ideology. The perfect personal example of this might makes right philosophy in action is rape. Rape is by definition the act of an attacker forcing themselves on another person to violate the victim. This argument needs to be taken into context of when these books were produced. Lewis gave these lectures during World War II when his country was being bombed by the Nazis. The Nazis did a lot of objectively horrible things. not subjectively horrible things. We must learn from history and develop our conscience so as to not repeat history by perpetuating World War III. So let's move on to proposition number 3. If we take the above statements to be true that the laws of objective morality are discerned through reason, then just like math and science, the conscience needs to be developed out of its infantile state. Human reasoning principles requiring development is the reason why some people do not agree on moral value judgments. This is also why Lewis is sure to make it very clear that we do not uphold this standard of morality that we all recognize. Each individual is at different stages of development and can only act based on their level of development. This is the perfect explanation of why there are people who have different perspectives on the good. Accordingly, Lewis and I think that our conscience requires development as a sense organ to make proper moral value measurement determinations. Just like all our other reasoning principles, it does not come ready made by nature at its peak performance. Analogically to the development of rationality and reason, the conscience needs to be developed. The major methods that reason uses today, math and logic, have gone through many developments throughout history, like trigonometry and calculus, and Aristotle and Kant, respectively. These different methods for using reason should also include the development of our conscience. Everyone starts out with vague moral intuitions of how to act in various circumstances, and this is the standard by which people recognize the need for fair play, decency, and morality. However, these vague moral intuitions cannot simply stay as such. They must be developed by conscience knowledge. This is why the root word conscience is the same as the root word for science. People make mistakes with moral value judgments, just like people make mistakes in math and science. However, analogically, it is something we can all learn and develop. The only way to develop something is to practice it. The way of the moral life or practical reason is a practice to be developed by learning the following moral laws listed in the appendix to the Abolition of Man. Lewis includes 8 general laws of objective morality while citing sources from our world's cultures to drive home the point that moral value is universally held to be objective on these laws. The first one is the law of general beneficence. The second is the law of special beneficence. The third is duty to parents, elders, and ancestors. The fourth is duty to children and posterity. The fifth is the law of justice, and on screen we see how Lewis presents his arguments by citing the world's cultures. The sixth is the law of good faith. The seventh is the law of mercy. The eighth is the law of magnanimity. And then, of my own accord, I added law 0, because all the above 8 laws have a foundation in the law of no damages, no injured party from the American common law. So what that means is don't rape, murder, steal, defraud, lie, cheat, verbally assault, or physically batter anyone or anyone's property. And since all the above 8 laws have its foundation in this law, it's law 0. To elaborate on what it means to have law 0 be the foundation for all of the other laws, Lewis provides what we should be doing. You should act with justice, good faith, mercy, magnanimity, and beneficence to parents, elders, ancestors, children, and posterity. Law 0 is what we should not be doing in terms of the opposite. We shouldn't murder, steal, defraud, lie, cheat, verbally assault, or physically batter anyone or anyone's property. So in that regard, they're really based on a very strong foundation. And that foundation is the Tao, or the objective reasoning principles that we have. So, for example, something I will mention in part 3 of this series is that it's objectively obvious that you can't have rape be acceptable in society and have a healthy society. That's something that anyone can come to the conclusion of just using the framework of objective reasoning principles in terms of what does it mean to objectively be healthy, both physically and mentally, in terms of society, both individually and collectively. And with that, we complete the second video in the series. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. And with that, I will see you next time with the third video in the series, where we will cover a critique of moral subjectivism.